You're watching Access Minnesota. Here's Jim Dubois.
Back now to our conversation with Michelle Garnett McKenzie and Robin Phillips from the group Advocates for Human Rights based in Minneapolis. What kinds of resources are available for immigrants and refugees to help them become more comfortable here in Minnesota?
Well, Minnesota has a really strong legal services system, particularly for immigrants and refugees. Compared to our neighbors, it's far inadequate for the demand that's placed on it, but we see, compared to other states, a very strong legal system that provides free assistance to low-income people, and also a vibrant community of immigration lawyers who can help those who can afford to pay for assistance. Strong commitment to civil rights and civil liberties in Minnesota, and to accountability with government systems. So those are all things that are really helpful. I think where we found people really needing more help was understanding that system, finding access points to it, knowing that there is a rule of law in the United States and in Minnesota, and if you find that you are the victim of discrimination, misconduct, something that violates our standards, it's incumbent upon you as the victim to come forward and make a complaint. That's one of the challenges that we really discovered in the work that we did, is because so much of the responsibility for prosecuting civil rights complaints falls on the victim themselves, often those go unnoticed. And particularly for those immigrants who are undocumented, where coming forward to raise a complaint can put them in line for deportation. That's really troubling because it allows discrimination or bad practices to fester. Because if the system relies solely on individual complaints and individuals can't bring them because of fear, we don't hear about that, and that hurts us all. So, that's something that we really need to work on to provide greater comfort. When we're talking about comfort, really greater access to the basic protections that we all need so that we're able to live with dignity.
I'd like to add, I think there's a lot of misperception in Minnesota about what kind of services are available, and we point out several things in our report. A couple I'd like to highlight. When refugees come to this country, we take them from war-torn countries, from refugee camps where they've been traumatized, and bring them here often without the language skills, and we provide them a safe place, but then we only provide financial assistance for 90 days. And then they're left and expected to completely adjust in that amount of time. When someone comes as a refugee to seek asylum here, we don't let them work for 6 months after they file their petition. And so they're not able to apply for work authorization.
And they're prohibited from public assistance. They have no access to any sort of assistance for health, for food, for anything during that time, that they're prohibited from working.
So we say, we have a legal provision, we welcome you here to safety, but you need to figure out a way for other people to give something to you so you can live for 6 months before we'll let you work. And we find that to be a serious problem for our clients and a serious problem in the system of bringing in refugees to our country.
What sort of recommendations did the report make for improving the human rights conditions for immigrants and refugees in Minnesota?
Well, we broke down specific recommendations around each of the areas that we looked at: education, housing, employment, the public safety, courts, access to justice. So the various areas each had specific recommendations. But we tried to look at systems that could be changed, new laws that we could be implementing, things that we could be implementing better, gaps and protections. One of the things, of course, underlying this is that U.S. immigration reform policy has kind of stalled out in Washington, and it's been really since 1965 that the United States has revisited its immigration policies. So looking at that is one part of this conversation. The federal government really needs to decide what U.S. immigration policy is going to be for incoming workers, how we're going to take care of the people who live here in our community, and need to be part of the community, not living in a shadow world. So that's one. But more importantly for Minnesota, because we can't control what Congress does, we all know that, is really looking at things that we can do. Are we enforcing our employment and workplace discrimination laws adequately? Do we have enough money invested in those? Do we have the systems in place that allow for complaints to go forward without an individual complainant looking at it? Are we making sure that when police take somebody into custody, that someone's reviewing to make sure that they're not turned over to immigration services before charges are brought or reviewed, and that the stop was legally enforced? Those are the kinds of things that need to happen, and that Minnesota can do without legislation, can do very easily.
From your interviews with the immigrants and refugees, did you sense optimism on their part that their situation will improve in Minnesota?
Absolutely. People, first of all, come into the United States with a sense of optimism. The people who decide to pick up and move from around the globe to come build a new life in this country are really resilient people, and often bring with them a sense of creativity and optimism that is, unmatched by people who were born here. They also tended to often say, look, whatever's happening for me, it's not nearly as bad as for my neighbor or for the person down the street or for what I left compared to what I left behind. So people kept things in perspective based on their life experience in a way that really, made them feel optimistic and looking forward. That's why it was important for us to balance our interviews with immigrants and refugees with people who were working in the systems that affect refugees and immigrants. And look, for one individual saying, look, this is a great place. I've only been stopped by the police a few times, and they always were really, respectful of me. That's helpful to know. Talking to the service provider who works with them and saying, look, over and over and over again, we see this practice of discrimination. We need to stop that. Gives us the balance in that perspective.
Michelle Garnett-McKenzie and Robin Phillips, thank you so much for joining us on Access Minnesota.
Thank you.
That's all for this month's edition of Access Minnesota. We'll see you again next month. Thanks for watching.
Access Minnesota. Issues that matter to you. Join us again next week as we bring you the newsmakers and stories that shape our everyday lives. Access Minnesota is produced by the Minnesota Broadcasters Association in cooperation with the University of Minnesota's College of Liberal Arts.